you guys, welcome to another LizMargaret YouTube video. So as you can see in the title, today's video is called Your Blessing Comes with Responsibility. When we think about blessings, we think about things that come from God, really great things, His promises, provision, breakthroughs, deliverance, hopes, and desires. Oftentimes, when it comes to asking God for these blessings, we don't realize it comes with a process, and oftentimes it actually can come with pain. For today's video, I want to talk about what it means to be waiting on God during these blessings. It can be a very trying time, so I want to discuss what attitude we can have, what God is doing during this time, what our perspective should be as we wait for God and as we take up our own responsibility when it comes to the blessings in our lives. But before I get into the video, I just want to send a reminder for you guys to send in a question that you have for my series, Ask LizMargaret, where you can ask any questions on life. It could be about your faith, it could be about relationships in your life, any advice you might need. You can send it right in. You can go to my blog, LizMargaret.com, and there will be a tab where you can submit any question or even a prayer request, and I would be happy to pray or answer your question in a video or a blog post. When I was first thinking about this topic, a verse came up in my head, which was Proverbs 13:12, which says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when the desire comes, it is a tree of life." And I felt like this proverb is very real. Hope deferred is referring to delays. We're talking about when you are expecting something and yet for some reason it's not coming through. It can be very trying. But what's interesting is the second half of the verse, but when the desire comes, it is a tree of life, right? But when it comes, which means there is a promise to come. And so for today's video, I really wanted it to be an encouragement when that hope is deferred, when we are in this season of waiting for whatever it is that God has promised to us. There are two things that we should look at and consider when it comes to blessings. So for this, I want to frame it around a familiar story in the Bible. It is in Luke chapter 8, verses 22 through 25. And what we have here is when Jesus is in a boat with his disciples crossing the Sea of Galilee, and he rebukes a storm that comes up on the sea. So what we see here is that Jesus has lordship over everything, even spiritual things. When we think about demons, the elements, we think about nature, even disease and death. So we see Jesus's lordship as he can even command the wind and the waves to obey him. But I want to dive in a bit more into this passage on when it comes to blessings, when it comes to storms in our life, when it comes to tests, and what God might be showing us during this time. So the first thing when it comes to blessings that we should consider is that in the waiting, God is preparing you to receive what he has for you. So essentially we enter a process. Verse 22 in Luke 8 opens, "Now it happened on a certain day that he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, 'Let us cross over to the other side of the lake.' And they launched out." So what we have in this first verse is that there is a promise that Jesus gives, and that is that we're going to get to the other side of the lake. Let's go to the other side. And they launch out. So immediately what we see is that the disciples are entering the process of this promise being fulfilled. Oftentimes in our lives, when Jesus might have a promise for us, whether it's in his word or something that he specifically puts on your heart, is that we enter a storm. This is so common that happens in our lives, is that we enter a test, we enter a waiting period, and it becomes difficult out of nowhere. Though Jesus promises his disciples that they will get to the other side, a storm indeed comes. So in verse 23 to 25, it says, "But as they sailed, he fell asleep, and a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in jeopardy. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, 'Master, Master, we are perishing.' Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and there was a calm. But he said to them, 'Where is your faith?'" Has God made a promise to you? Are you believing God for blessings? Are you believing him to get you to the other side? Because what we have here with these disciples is, once again, right after the promise is made, a storm comes, and it seems like Jesus is sleeping, like he's not doing anything. And oftentimes we might feel this way when a storm comes in our life and interrupts our day-to-day, where it's like, God, what's going on? Like, are you even listening to me? Are you asleep on me? Right? But what we find here is that during this test period, we are stretched in our weaknesses. We face our fears. We see ourselves realistically. We see the truth. If you think about it, say, for example, you go out all day, you come home, and you see yourself in the mirror. This happens to me, definitely. I'm sure it's happened to you guys before, that you're like, whoa, did I go outside like this? Like, you might have your hair looking crazy, or maybe some buttons are undone. You had something on your teeth or something on your face. You had no idea. It's a shock. Like, I was outside like this. And similarly, when we enter through storms, what happens is that I feel oftentimes God puts us in a position to see ourselves in a mirror where we can see, whoa, that's what I'm like. That's what my heart's like. That's who I am. And so we are similarly given a shock to see the truth of who we really are. And so through tests, our real selves come to light. And this points us back to our goal, which is to get right with God. So for the disciples, after Jesus rebukes the storm, he turns to them and asks them, where is your faith? So for the disciples themselves, they're able to see in this scary circumstance that they lacked faith. Similarly for us, we might enter a circumstance and see, wow, I didn't realize I would doubt God that quickly. Once again, tests are a great opportunity for us to see ourselves for who we really are and see what needs to change in our lives. When these trials come your way, when a storm comes your way, don't be surprised, and instead use this as an opportunity to see what God might be bringing your attention to, where your faith needs to change, where you need to grow your faith. You'd be surprised at how God might be preparing you through that very thing that comes into your life to test you. So the second point I want to make about blessings is that your waiting enables you to value the blessing. Your eyes become open in the process. In verse 25, the second half of this verse, it says, and they were afraid and marveled, saying to one another, who can this be? For he commands even the winds and water, and they obey him. This is such a really cool moment. After Jesus rebukes the storm, the disciples really are starting to see Jesus for who he is, because they saw how big the storm was. They saw, oh my gosh, we are going to perish. And so the fact that Jesus is the one who calmed this big storm really shows them how big and how much bigger Jesus is than the storm that they were even going through. While we are waiting for this blessing, while we might go through a trial, what we find is that oftentimes we come to the end of ourselves. And I think that this is such a necessary moment for us to realize, I can't do this, and I really need Jesus for this blessing. Like, he's the only way. But what happens is that when it comes, you find you know what it took to get there. You saw that only God could do it. Another thing is that time really proves how much you really want that blessing. If you want something, you work towards it. It just makes sense, right? You seek God. You do the growing necessary, knowing that in order for something to happen, you need to step up to the plate. You do what it takes. So what we have is that God is the one who makes it happen. However, you also play a role in this blessing, right? What we see again is that the disciples did seek Jesus themselves when the storm came. They called out, Master, Master. Hebrews 11:6 says, and without faith it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So what we have here again, we have to play the role in seeking God. We have to play the role in having that faith. And, even if you lack in that area, the great thing is that you seek God to help you build that faith, help you in that unbelief. Another verse is James 4:7, which says, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. And I love this verse because speaking of temptation, especially when trials come, oftentimes we might be tempted to do this or do that, things that might be contrary to what God is telling you or just contrary to his word. But we see the role in temptation and overcoming it is resisting it and submitting to God. And once again, that's where the responsibility comes through, because we have a responsibility, a personal responsibility to get right, to get in alignment for what God is about to do in our lives. So can he trust you with this blessing? Can he bring it in your path? Or are you getting in the way of God making a way in your life, making a miracle happen in your life? It's something to really consider. Has the Lord already promised you, let's get to the other side? God is preparing you for the fulfillment of whatever it is that he has promised you. It comes with a personal responsibility. Ask God to show you whatever it needs, what never needs to change in your life, whatever it is that you cannot see. Ask him to open your eyes. A test doesn't mean that God is not working. Oftentimes it actually means that God is working. So again, it's important for us to refocus, step back and see, well, I asked God for this thing and now all of a sudden all this chaos has come about. Think about, oftentimes things like that are not a coincidence. Oftentimes God permits these things to happen because he's positioning you to get ready for your blessing. I also want to send a reminder that when it's God, it is worth it. Anything that you go through, it's worth it. The blessing that's on the other side of your obedience is 100% worth it, right? Going back to Proverbs 13:12, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when the desire comes, it is a tree of life. So once again, we have delays, postponements of your expectations can be so disheartening. It can be discouraging, right? But when it comes, it brings the most fulfilling satisfaction, especially when you know this is God. What I want to remind you is that it is worth it. Whatever it is that you are waiting on, whatever it is that you are believing God for in your life, it will be worth it. Hope that you took something from this video. I hope that is very encouraging for you. Whatever place you are right now in your life, just remember that God is with you and whatever he's promised will come to fruition. That's just the nature of who he is. So if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's going to be so many more videos to come, and check out my blog, LizMargaret.com, where I write blog posts about my faith, topics like these. Don't forget to submit a question as well for Ask LizMargaret, and I'll see you guys in the next video.